Some knowledge changes you in ways you cannot undo. I am Robert Oppenheimer, and I led the team that first split the atom for war. People think they understand nuclear power because they see reactors, bombs in films, or hear about Chernobyl. They imagine it as just another energy source, more powerful than coal or oil. They have no conception of what we actually discovered. When you break apart the nucleus of an atom, you are not simply releasing stored energy like burning wood. You are converting matter itself into pure energy according to Einstein's equation. The amount of energy locked inside ordinary matter is so vast that a single pound of uranium contains the explosive force of 8,000 tons of dynamite. But that is just mathematics. What haunted us was realizing we had learned to unleash forces that power stars. We were not engineers anymore. We had become gods, playing with the fundamental architecture of reality itself. Before we continue, take a moment to notice where you're listening from. And if this story stays with you, you're welcome to return tomorrow for what comes next. I often think about the blackboard in my Berkeley office as it looked in the autumn of 1939, covered in equations, chalk dust settling into the wooden frame like snow. The mathematics of quantum mechanics spread across that dark surface seemed so pure then, so removed from the world of nations and wars. I was 35 years old, teaching theoretical physics to bright young minds who came to California seeking understanding of the universe's deepest structures. My concerns were elegant. The behavior of electrons, the nature of stellar collapse, the poetry hidden in Schrödinger's wave equation. I read Sanskrit in my spare time and quoted the Bhagavad Gita to colleagues who thought me eccentric but harmless. Nuclear fission was barely a year old as a known phenomenon. When Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann published their findings from Berlin in early 1939, showing that uranium nuclei could be split by neutron bombardment, it created excitement in the physics community. Here was confirmation of what some had suspected. The nucleus was not an indivisible unit. It could be broken apart. But the excitement was purely intellectual. We were like children discovering that rocks could be split with hammers, marveling at the clean break, the exposed crystalline structure. The idea that such splitting might release enormous energy was theoretical. Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, was mathematical truth, not engineering blueprint. I remember the precise moment that changed for me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. Leo Szilard had come from Columbia University to discuss what he and Fermi had been calculating. We sat in my office, that same blackboard behind us, and he explained what neutron multiplication might mean. If each fission produces more than one neutron, he said, drawing simple circles on a piece of paper, and those neutrons cause more fissions, which produce more neutrons. He did not need to finish. I could see the mathematical progression as clearly as if it were written in fire. Chain reaction. The phrase sounds innocent enough now, like a child's game. But what Szilard was describing was the possibility of self-sustaining nuclear fission. Once started, it would continue until all the fissile material was consumed or the reaction mass was blown apart by its own energy release. I walked to my blackboard and began working through the mathematics. The numbers were startling. If you could achieve critical mass, the point where neutron production exceeded neutron loss, the energy release would be enormous. Not enormous like a large fire or even a massive chemical explosion. Enormous like nothing human civilization had ever witnessed. How much uranium would you need? I asked, still writing equations. Szilard's estimate was rough, but even his conservative calculation suggested that tens of pounds, not tons, might suffice. Tens of pounds to release energy equivalent to thousands of tons of chemical explosive. The ratio defied common sense. It was as if someone had discovered that a matchbox could contain the power of a lightning strike. Yet even then, even with the mathematics stark before me, it felt abstract. Uranium was rare, difficult to purify. The precise conditions for sustaining a chain reaction were unknown. Most importantly, the idea of building such a device seemed fantastical. Who would attempt to harness forces that operated inside stars? The answer came sooner than any of us expected. Einstein's letter to President Roosevelt, written that same autumn at Szilard's urging, mentioned the possibility that Germany might develop uranium-based weapons. The letter was polite, almost apologetic in tone, but it carried a warning that changed everything. If Nazi scientists achieved nuclear fission weapons first, the war would be over before America could respond. I supported the letter's message, though I did not yet grasp what supporting it would mean for my own life. The theoretical had suddenly become practical.
The elegant mathematics on my blackboard had become a matter of national survival. When the first small government funds arrived to study uranium fission, I threw myself into the work with enthusiasm. Here was physics with a purpose beyond understanding. Here was a chance to apply the most fundamental insights about matter and energy to protect democracy from fascism. The romance of it appealed to me tremendously. I recruited graduate students, corresponded with colleagues, set up experiments in Berkeley's radiation laboratory. We were still thinking like academics. Careful, methodical, publishing papers for peer review. The sense of urgency existed, but it felt manageable. We had time to understand what we were doing before we did it. This confidence lasted until I calculated the actual energy release from complete uranium fission. I had known the theoretical maximum, of course, but I had never worked through what it would mean in practical terms. When I did the mathematics properly, sitting alone in my office late one evening in early 1941, I stopped writing and sat back in my chair. A single kilogram of uranium-235, if completely fissioned, would release energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. 20,000 tons. The largest conventional bombs then in existence contained perhaps 1 ton of explosive material. We were contemplating forces 20,000 times greater. I remember walking to my office window and looking out at the Berkeley campus. Students were crossing the quad in the twilight, heading to dinner or evening study sessions. The normal life of a university continued exactly as it had for decades. But I knew that this normalcy was already ending, had perhaps ended the moment Hahn and Strassmann first observed uranium fission. The physics was elegant, yes. The mathematics was beautiful, certainly. But what we were learning to do was not merely harness energy. We were learning to convert matter itself into destruction on a scale that had no precedent in human history. Every gram of matter contained enormous energy, locked away since the formation of atoms billions of years ago. We were developing keys to unlock that ancient power. Standing at that window, I understood that we had crossed a threshold. The atom had revealed secrets that could not be unknown once learned. Whatever weapons we built, whatever energy we released, the knowledge itself would persist. Other scientists in other countries would discover the same principles, develop the same capabilities. Nuclear fission was not merely a new technology. It was a permanent change in what human beings could do to each other and to the world. The innocent beginning was already over, though the true consequences would take years to unfold. The mesa stretched before us like an ancient altar, 7,000 feet above sea level in the high desert of New Mexico. Los Alamos had been a boys' school before the Army requisitioned it in 1942. Now it would become something unprecedented, a laboratory dedicated entirely to building the most destructive weapon ever conceived. I arrived in March of 1943 as scientific director of what we called simply the project. The official designation was Manhattan Engineered District, but those words conveyed nothing of what we were actually attempting. We were trying to build a bomb that would harness the fundamental forces of matter itself. The isolation was deliberate. General Groves wanted our work hidden from German spies and curious civilians alike, but the remoteness served another purpose I had not anticipated. Cut off from the normal world of universities and cities, we existed in a strange realm where the impossible became routine and the theoretical became engineering challenge. My first task was assembling the team. I needed the brightest minds in physics, chemistry, mathematics, and metallurgy. Enrico Fermi came from Chicago, where he had achieved the first controlled nuclear chain reaction just months earlier. Edward Teller arrived from Columbia, already obsessed with fusion weapons that would dwarf anything we were currently planning. Hans Bethe brought his unparalleled expertise in nuclear reactions. Dozens of others followed, young men mostly, brilliant and eager to contribute to what they saw as humanity's greatest scientific undertaking. Living conditions were primitive. We slept in hastily constructed dormitories and worked in laboratories that were often just wooden buildings with concrete floors. The altitude left many of us breathless for weeks. But the isolation and hardship created an extraordinary sense of purpose. We were not just colleagues, we were conspirators in the most momentous secret project in history. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable at first. To build an atomic bomb, we needed to solve problems that had never been attempted. How do you purify uranium-235 from the much more common uranium-238? How do you design a device that will bring fissile material to critical mass quickly enough to achieve explosion rather than mere dispersal? How do you predict the behavior of matter under conditions that have never existed on Earth? But it was the calculations of critical mass that first made me understand the true nature of what we were building. The mathematical work fell largely to a group of young physicists who worked with slide rules and mechanical calculators, spending days on computations that would take modern computers mere seconds. I remember the morning in late 1943 when the first reliable estimates came back. We had gathered in the theoretical physics building, a nondescript wooden structure that housed some of the most advanced thinking in human history. The question before us was simple. Exactly how much uranium-235 would we need to achieve a self-sustaining explosive chain reaction? The answer was shocking in its modesty. Roughly 50 pounds. 50 pounds of purified uranium-235 compressed to sufficient density would create an explosion equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosive. The number seemed almost absurd. I could carry 50 pounds of material in my arms, yet properly arranged, it would destroy an entire city. But the calculations revealed something even more disturbing. The reaction would not simply release the chemical energy stored in molecular bonds, as conventional explosives do. It would convert matter directly into energy according to Einstein's equation. A small fraction of the uranium's mass would cease to exist as matter and reappear as pure energy. When I worked through the mathematics myself, checking and rechecking the young physicist's calculations, I experienced something I can only describe as vertigo. Not physical dizziness, but a profound disorientation at the scale of forces we were attempting to harness. The energy binding atomic nuclei together had been locked away since the formation of the elements in stellar cores billions of years ago. We were learning to release that ancient energy in millionths of a second. The bomb would not merely be a weapon. It would be a device for converting matter into energy on a scale previously achieved only by stars. Fermi, with his characteristic precision, helped me understand the implications. The temperature at the moment of detonation, he explained, will exceed that of the sun's surface. The pressure will be millions of times greater than atmospheric pressure at sea level. For a brief instant, we will create conditions that exist nowhere else in the solar system. This was not engineering in any conventional sense. We were not building a larger version of existing weapons. We were creating artificial miniature stars, controlled stellar explosions that would unleash forces never before witnessed on Earth. The work consumed us completely. 18-hour days became routine. We ate meals without tasting them, slept fitfully, and woke thinking about neutron cross-sections and implosion dynamics. The normal rhythms of human life disappeared, replaced by an intensity of purpose I had never experienced. Yet even as we solved one technical problem after another, I began to sense an undertone of unease among the team. We were succeeding too well. The weapon we were designing would be far more powerful than anyone had initially imagined. Early estimates of destructive capacity proved conservative as our understanding of nuclear physics improved. Teller, in particular, pushed us to consider weapons beyond the uranium bomb we were developing. If nuclear fission could release such enormous energy, what about nuclear fusion?
What about combining hydrogen atoms into helium, the process that powers the sun itself? Such weapons would have no practical upper limit to their destructive capacity.
I discouraged these discussions, at least officially. Our mandate was to build fission weapons as quickly as possible to end the war with Germany. But privately, I understood that Teller was right. Once the principles of nuclear weapons became known, there would be no natural stopping point. Each breakthrough would enable the next. Each weapon would suggest a more powerful successor. Late at night, when the laboratory finally quieted, and I walked alone across the mesa under the brilliant New Mexico stars, I sometimes wondered what we had set in motion.
The universe above me was powered by the same nuclear processes we were learning to control. Every star was a sustained nuclear reaction, converting matter into energy on scales that dwarfed our modest bomb designs.
But stars were separated by vast distances, their energy safely contained by gravity and dispersed across space. We were bringing stellar forces down to Earth, concentrating them into devices small enough to fit an aircraft, powerful enough to destroy cities. The mathematical beauty of the physics remained undeniable. The equations were elegant, the principles profound. But beauty and truth, I was learning, could serve purposes that had nothing to do with human welfare. Knowledge was not inherently moral. Understanding the universe's deepest secrets did not make us wise, only capable of manipulating forces beyond our full comprehension. By early 1944, our critical mass calculations were complete and reliable. We knew exactly how to build an atomic bomb. The only question remaining was whether we would have the courage to test what we had designed. The device sat on its tower like a grotesque metal sphere 20 miles from our observation bunker in the Jornada del Muerto desert. Trinity. We had named the test after a line from John Donne's poetry that had been running through my mind. Batter my heart, three-personed God. The irony was not lost on me that we had chosen a religious name for humanity's first attempt to harness the forces of creation itself. It was the 16th of July, 1945, 4:30 in the morning. The desert air was still cool. though we knew the day would bring punishing heat. Around me, in the concrete observation bunker, 20 miles from ground zero, the world's leading physicists made final preparations to witness something that had never happened before: the artificial release of nuclear energy on an explosive scale. The months leading to this moment had been filled with calculations that kept me awake at night. Not technical calculations this time, but moral ones. Germany had surrendered in May. Hitler was dead. The Third Reich collapsed. The original justification for our bomb project had vanished. Yet we continued toward Trinity, driven by a momentum that seemed to have acquired its own life.
President Truman was meeting with Stalin and Churchill at Potsdam, waiting for word from our test. If Trinity succeeded, America would possess a weapon that could end the Pacific War immediately.
If it failed, invasion of Japan would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. The mathematics of warfare had become entangled with the mathematics of nuclear physics. But beyond these strategic considerations lay questions that tormented me. We were about to test a device designed to kill human beings more efficiently than any weapon in history. The bomb would not discriminate between soldiers and civilians, between the guilty and innocent. It would simply convert matter into energy and destroy everything within its radius of effect. Worse, I knew that Trinity was only the beginning. The plutonium device we were testing was one of two types we had developed. The uranium bomb was already en route to the Pacific, ready for combat use. If our test succeeded, cities would burn before summer ended. The hours before dawn stretched endlessly. We had covered the observation windows with specially darkened glass, but even so, we were warned not to look directly at the explosion. The light would be brighter than the sun, hot enough to cause blindness from 20 miles away. We would be witnessing the birth of an artificial star. At 5:29, I was lying face down on the desert floor as instructed, eyes closed, waiting for the signal. The countdown reached 0. First came the light. Even with my eyes shut and my face pressed against the ground, the flash was overwhelming. The desert around me became brighter than noon, shadows sharp and black against sand that glowed like molten silver. The light lasted for what seemed like minutes, but was actually only seconds, pulsing and shifting in intensity as the fireball expanded and cooled. When I opened my eyes and looked toward ground zero through the darkened glass, I saw something that no human being had ever seen before. A column of fire rose from the desert floor, climbing toward the stratosphere with impossible speed. The fireball grew larger than I had calculated, brighter than our models predicted, more terrible than our most pessimistic estimates. The mushroom cloud that formed above the rising column seemed to pulse with its own light, purple and orange and white, colors that had no names because they existed nowhere else in nature. The sight was beautiful and horrible simultaneously, like watching the birth and death of a world compressed into moments. Then came the heat. 20 miles away, the thermal pulse struck our bunker like the opening of a furnace door. The temperature rose perceptibly, even at our distance. I thought of what that heat must be like at ground zero, where the temperature had briefly exceeded that of stellar cores. The sound arrived last, a rumble that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Not the sharp crack of conventional explosives, but something deeper and more fundamental. It was the sound of matter being converted into energy, the voice of Einstein's equation made audible. When the initial shock passed, I stood and looked at what we had done. The desert floor where our device had been was now glass, fused by temperatures beyond anything that had existed on Earth since the planet's formation. The steel tower that had held our bomb had simply vanished, vaporized in the first millisecond of the reaction. Around me, the other physicists reacted with excitement and horror in equal measure. Fermi was dropping pieces of paper to measure the shock wave's strength. Teller was already talking about fusion weapons that would make Trinity look like a firecracker, but I felt only a profound sense of dread. The words that came to me were from the Bhagavad Gita, which I had read in Sanskrit. Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. The line seemed to speak itself in my mind as I watched the mushroom cloud climb toward the heavens. We had learned to harness forces that had previously belonged only to gods, but it was more than the scale of destruction that horrified me. Trinity had revealed something about the nature of nuclear energy that our calculations had predicted, but which I had not fully grasped until I witnessed it directly. Nuclear weapons were not simply more powerful versions of conventional bombs. They were devices that temporarily reproduced the conditions inside stars. The fireball I had just watched contained pressures millions of times greater than atmospheric pressure, temperatures that exceeded the surface of the sun, radiation levels that would kill anything living for miles around. For a brief moment, we had created a piece of stellar interior on the surface of our planet. Standing in that bunker, Watching the radioactive cloud drift across the New Mexico sky, I understood that we had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return.
Nuclear weapons were not tools that could be controlled by ordinary human institutions. They were manifestations of forces so vast that they changed the fundamental relationship between human beings and the physical universe.
The test had been a complete success. Our measurements showed that the explosive yield was equivalent to approximately 20,000 tons of TNT, exactly matching our most optimistic predictions. The plutonium implosion design had worked flawlessly. Within weeks, similar devices would be ready for combat use. But success felt like failure. We had proved that human beings could build weapons that operated on cosmic scales. We had demonstrated that matter and energy could be manipulated to create destruction beyond anything in human history. We had shown that the knowledge contained in physics textbooks could be transformed into devices capable of ending civilization. As dawn broke over the Jornada del Muerto, the aptly named Journey of Death, I realized that the innocence of physics was over forever. The elegant equations that had once seemed like poetry now revealed themselves as instructions for apocalypse. The same principles that powered stars and held atoms together could be turned to purposes that had nothing to do with understanding and everything to do with destruction. The success of Trinity meant that nuclear weapons were no longer theoretical possibilities but engineering realities. Other nations would develop similar capabilities within years. The secret knowledge we had discovered could not remain secret indefinitely. Physics was international. What American scientists could achieve, others could achieve as well. Looking at the mushroom cloud that still dominated the eastern sky, I knew that we had created more than a weapon. We had created a permanent condition of human existence. From this moment forward, our species would live with the knowledge that it possessed the means of its own extinction. The atomic age had begun. The telegram arrived at Los Alamos on the 6th of August, 1945, at 11 p.m. Mountain Time. Mission successful. Target destroyed as briefed. No fighter opposition, no flak. Proceeding to alternate base. 16 words that confirmed our theoretical calculations had become human devastation half a world away. I was in my office when the news reached me, working late, as had become my habit since Trinity. The Manhattan Project was winding down its wartime phase, but the implications of our success were just beginning to unfold. When my secretary handed me the decoded message from the Enola Gay, I read it twice before the meaning fully registered. Little boy, our uranium bomb had detonated over Hiroshima with the force of approximately 15,000 tons of TNT. The city was gone. 80,000 people had died instantly, with tens of thousands more dying from radiation effects we were only beginning to understand. Theoretical physics had become the most efficient killing machine in human history. The scientists at Los Alamos reacted with a mixture of celebration and horror that reflected the strange moral landscape we inhabited. We had succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. The war would end within days, saving hundreds of thousands of American lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. From a strategic perspective, our weapon had performed exactly as designed. The human cost was staggering in ways that pure mathematics could not capture. We had known that nuclear weapons would kill civilians. We had calculated blast radii, thermal effects, and radiation doses with scientific precision. What we had not fully comprehended was the moral weight of converting those calculations into actual human suffering on such a massive scale. 3 days later came news of Nagasaki. Fat Man, our plutonium implosion design, had destroyed a second city with even greater efficiency. The war ended within a week, exactly as our strategic planners had predicted. Japan surrendered unconditionally, avoiding the millions of casualties that military experts estimated an invasion would have caused. Yet victory felt hollow. We had demonstrated that nuclear weapons worked precisely as our physics indicated they would. The problem was that they worked too well. The destruction was so complete, so immediate, so far beyond anything in previous human experience that it seemed to belong to a different category of violence entirely. In the weeks following Hiroshima and Nagasaki, reports filtered back from Japan that revealed effects we had not anticipated. The radiation sickness that killed thousands in the weeks and months after the explosions was more severe and widespread than our medical advisors had predicted. Burns from thermal radiation caused suffering that persisted long after the initial blast. Survivors described a landscape so thoroughly devastated that it resembled photographs of the lunar surface. But it was the reports of radiation's genetic effects that disturbed me most profoundly. Pregnant women exposed to nuclear radiation gave birth to children with deformities and developmental problems. The weapons we had built did not simply kill people. They damage the fundamental biological processes that create new life. This was the aspect of nuclear weapons that set them apart from all previous instruments of war. Conventional explosives destroyed buildings and killed people within their immediate blast radius. Then their effects ended. Nuclear weapons created lingering contamination that made entire areas uninhabitable for years. They released radiation that damaged living tissue in ways that manifested months or even years later. From a purely scientific perspective, these effects were predictable. Nuclear fission produces radioactive isotopes that decay over time, releasing energy that damages cellular structures. We had calculated exposure levels and estimated casualty rates based on laboratory experiments with animals.
But translating those calculations into human reality revealed the inadequacy of scientific methodology when applied to moral question. I began to understand that we had created weapons that operated outside the normal frameworks of military strategy. Traditional warfare involved armies fighting armies, with civilian casualties as unfortunate but limited side effects. Nuclear weapons made no such distinction. They killed everything within their radius of effect and contaminated vast areas beyond their immediate blast zones.
Moreover, the scale of destruction was so enormous that it changed the fundamental nature of international relations. No nation could defend itself against nuclear attack.
No military strategy could protect civilian populations from weapons that destroyed entire cities in single strikes. The existence of nuclear weapons made traditional concepts of national defense obsolete.
This realization led me to a conclusion that would shape the rest of my life. Nuclear weapons were not simply more powerful versions of conventional arms. They were instruments that transcended the normal purposes of military force. They could not be used for limited objectives or carefully controlled military operations. They could only be used for total destruction. The scientists at Los Alamos began to debate what we had created. Some, like Teller, argued that our success proved we should develop even more powerful weapons. Fusion bombs that would dwarf the destruction of Hiroshima. Weapons with no practical upper limit to their destructive capacity. If nuclear fission could end a world war in days, what could nuclear fusion accomplish? Others, like Leo Szilard, argued that we had already gone too far. The demonstration of nuclear weapons effects should lead to international agreements preventing their further development. The technology should be placed under international control before other nations developed similar capabilities. I found myself increasingly aligned with those who questioned whether we should continue developing nuclear weapons. Not from pacifist sentiment, but from scientific understanding of what these weapons actually were. We had not simply built better bombs. We had learned to harness stellar forces for terrestrial purposes, and the results were fundamentally incompatible with human civilization as we understood it. The problem was not merely the immediate destruction nuclear weapons caused, though that was horrifying enough. The deeper problem was that nuclear technology created permanent changes in what human beings could do to each other. The knowledge of how to build these weapons could not be erased. The physics principles we had discovered could not be forgotten. This meant that nuclear weapons would inevitably proliferate to other nations. The Soviet Union was already working on its own atomic bomb program, using intelligence gathered during the war, and recruiting German scientists captured from the Nazi nuclear effort. Within a few years, multiple nations would possess weapons capable of destroying entire cities. But even more troubling was the realization that nuclear technology could not remain confined to military applications. The same processes that powered our bombs could be adapted for energy generation. Nuclear reactors would seem like peaceful applications of atomic energy, but they would inevitably create the materials and knowledge necessary for weapons production. Standing in my Los Alamos office in the autumn of 1945, reading intelligence reports about Soviet nuclear research and civilian reactor proposals, I understood that we had opened a door that could never be closed. Nuclear technology would spread throughout the world, bringing with it the permanent possibility of destruction on scales that dwarfed anything in human history. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. We had set out to build weapons that would win a war and preserve democracy. We had succeeded, but in the process we had created instruments that threatened the survival of civilization itself. The same scientific principles that revealed the elegant structure of matter could be turned to purposes that had nothing to do with human welfare. I thought often of the Bhagavad Gita passage that had come to me at Trinity. Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. But the full meaning of those words was only becoming clear in the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We had not simply built weapons of unprecedented power. We had learned to manipulate forces that operated on cosmic scales, and we had shown that such manipulation was compatible with human purposes only in the most destructive ways. The atomic age was not just beginning with our victory over Japan. It was beginning as a permanent condition of human existence, a new reality in which our species possessed the means of its own extinction, and the knowledge to build those means could never be erased. I write these final thoughts from my study at Princeton in 1965, 20 years after Trinity changed the world forever. The handwritten notes scattered across my desk represent my attempts to understand what we unleashed that morning in the New Mexico desert and what it means for the future of human civilization. The optimists speak of peaceful atoms, of nuclear power that will provide clean energy for generations. They imagine reactors heating homes, powering cities, propelling ships across the oceans. They see nuclear technology as humanity's mastery over the fundamental forces of nature, a triumph of science over scarcity. They are both right and catastrophically wrong. Yes, nuclear fission can generate enormous amounts of energy from small amounts of fuel. The same uranium that powered our bombs can heat water, drive turbines, and light cities. The physics is identical, the engineering straightforward. From a purely technical perspective, nuclear power represents one of humanity's greatest achievements. But technical achievement and human wisdom are entirely different things. What the advocates of peaceful atoms refuse to acknowledge is that you cannot separate nuclear power from nuclear weapons. They are two faces of the same phenomenon, two applications of identical physical principles. Any nation that masters nuclear power inherently acquires the knowledge and materials necessary for nuclear weapons. This is not a problem that can be solved by international agreements or regulatory oversight. It is built into the fundamental nature of nuclear technology itself. The uranium enrichment required for reactor fuel can be extended to weapons-grade purity. The plutonium produced in nuclear reactors is directly usable in weapons. The expertise developed for peaceful nuclear programs translates immediately to military applications. I have watched this process unfold exactly as the physics predicted it would. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949, using plutonium produced in reactors ostensibly built for research purposes. Britain followed in 1952, France in 1960. Each nation justified its nuclear program as defensive, necessary for national security, in a world where others possessed such weapons. But the true proliferation has only begun. Every nation that builds nuclear reactors for electrical power will acquire the capability to build nuclear weapons. The technology will spread not through military conquest or espionage, but through the normal processes of industrial development and scientific education. Within decades, dozens of nations will possess nuclear arsenals. More troubling still is the realization that nuclear weapons will not remain under the exclusive control of national governments. The same technology that enables nations to build atomic bombs will eventually become accessible to smaller organizations, terrorist groups, perhaps even individuals with sufficient technical knowledge and access to nuclear materials. This is the permanent danger we created at Los Alamos. Knowledge that cannot be forgotten. Technology that cannot be uninvented. Weapons that make every human conflict potentially terminal. We opened a door to forces that operate on cosmic scales, and that door can never be closed. The mathematical certainty of this conclusion haunts me. In a world where dozens of nations possess nuclear weapons, the probability of their use approaches certainty over time.
It may take decades or centuries, but eventually accidents will happen, conflicts will escalate beyond rational control, or leaders will emerge who view nuclear war as acceptable.
Each nuclear weapon represents a permanent threat, not just to its immediate targets, but to the continuation of human civilization. Unlike conventional wars, which destroy armies and governments but leave societies intact, nuclear war would destroy the technological and social foundations on which modern civilization depends. The radiation effects alone would create uninhabitable zones that persist for generations. Nuclear warfare would contaminate agricultural land, destroy industrial infrastructure, and kill the skilled populations necessary to maintain complex technologies. Recovery from comprehensive nuclear war might be impossible within any reasonable time frame. Yet we continue building these weapons, continue spreading nuclear technology, continue pretending that forces capable of ending human civilization can be safely controlled by the same political institutions that have failed to prevent every other form of warfare in human history. I am often asked whether I regret my role in developing nuclear weapons. The question misses the fundamental point. Regret implies that different choices might have led to different outcomes. But the physics principles we discovered would have been discovered by others within years. The German nuclear program was following the same scientific trail we pursued. If American scientists had refused to build atomic bombs, Nazi scientists might have succeeded first. The tragedy is not that we built nuclear weapons when we did, but that nuclear weapons could be built at all.
The tragedy is that the same scientific understanding that reveals the elegant structure of matter also provides instructions for destroying civilization. Knowledge itself has become dangerous in ways that previous generations could never have imagined.
What I regret is not recognizing sooner how fundamentally nuclear technology would change human existence.
We approached the Manhattan Project as an engineering challenge, a technical problem to be solved through the application of scientific principles.
We did not adequately consider that we were creating instruments incompatible with human institutions. Nuclear weapons require perfection from human beings and human institutions. They demand that nations never miscalculate, leaders never lose their sanity, military systems never malfunction, and conflicts never escalate beyond rational control.
But human beings and human institutions are inherently imperfect. What nuclear technology demands is literally impossible to provide. This is why nuclear power is ultimately inseparable from nuclear danger.
Not because reactors themselves are weapons, but because nuclear technology creates the knowledge, materials, and industrial infrastructure that make nuclear weapons inevitable.
Every nuclear reactor is a step toward a world where dozens of nations possess the means of ending civilization. The peaceful atom is a beautiful dream and a catastrophic delusion. It imagines that we can harness stellar forces for human benefit while avoiding their destructive potential. It assumes that knowledge with the power to destroy worlds can be safely confined to constructive purposes. It ignores the fundamental reality that nuclear technology cannot be separated from nuclear weapons.
Standing here at the end of my career, watching nuclear weapons proliferate exactly as the physics predicted they would, I understand that we crossed a threshold at Trinity from which there is no return. We have given humanity the power to destroy itself, and that power will only grow more widespread and more accessible as time passes. This is our legacy. Not the victory over fascism that nuclear weapons helped achieve, not the promise of abundant nuclear energy,
but the permanent possibility that human civilization might end not through natural catastrophe or gradual decline, but through the deliberate or accidental use of technologies that harness the forces of stars.
We have become a species capable of cosmic destruction, but we remain governed by Stone Age emotions and medieval institutions. The combination is inherently unstable and ultimately terminal. The knowledge we gained cannot be lost. The weapons we designed cannot be uninvented. The danger we created cannot be eliminated. This is what nuclear power really means. Not clean energy or national security, but permanent insecurity for every human being on Earth. We have learned to split atoms, but we have not learned to control ourselves. Until we do, if we ever do, we remain one calculation away from annihilation.